From writing on clay at the very beginning of history, it's a form of time travel. It catapults you back in time thousands of years and puts you directly into the shoes of somebody who lived so many years before us.
A small clay tablet, buried for thousands of years, carries a claim so strange it feels impossible to ignore. 5 species may have existed before humans, and each one ended in a different, terrifying way. Some were tied to water and stone. Others walked the land like living monuments. But the most unsettling part is not their existence. It is the pattern behind their disappearance. As the tablet moves from ancient beings to something eerily close to us, one question grows darker. Were these just lost worlds, or warnings left behind? Anshaga, the technological civilization. Anshaga are called those of the inner heaven, and that name alone gives them a strange and unsettling place among the 5 species. Unlike the others, they are not described through body shape, size, bones, skin, or movement. The tablet does not spend much time telling us what it looked like. Instead, it focuses on what they could do. That makes them feel less like a creature from the natural world and more like a civilization. Their identity is built around knowledge, invention, and power. They knew the counting of all things. They built structures that changed how they saw the stars. They spoke across distances without sound. And they held the divine laws not as gifts from the gods, but as something they had earned through their own understanding. That detail makes the Anshaga stand apart. Other species survived by adapting to the world around them. The Uldu were tied to water and stone. The Gunurgal ruled the land through size. The Ashmegar survived through group behavior. The Lunita Kur lived close to human ways, with tools, caves, skins, and burial customs. But the Anshaga were different. They were not just living inside the world, they were studying it, measuring it, naming it, testing it. They seemed to look at nature not as a mystery to fear, but as a system to understand.
Lots of unexpected things came to light, but probably none which had greater impact than the discovery of the 11th tablet.
That is what makes them so fascinating, and also so dangerous. Their strength was not muscle, numbers, or instinct. Their strength was the mind. The phrase, counting of all things, suggests more than basic numbers. It points to mathematics, records, patterns, measurements, and perhaps a deeper understanding of time, distance, and movement. A species that can count all things is not simply surviving day by day. It is organizing the world. It is tracking the sky, measuring the land, dividing seasons, and finding hidden order in nature. That kind of knowledge can build calendars, cities, machines, and systems of control. It can turn the unknown into something predictable. For the Anshaga, knowledge may have begun as a tool for survival, but over time, it became the center of their power. Their structures are even more mysterious. The tablet says they built things that moved the stars in their vision. This does not have to mean they literally moved stars across the sky. It may point to observatories, lenses, aligned monuments, or devices that changed how they watched the heavens. They may have tracked the movement of planets, predicted seasons, or mapped the night sky with a skill far beyond ordinary sight. This detail gives them a connection to astronomy and advanced observation. They were looking upward, not just outward. They were not satisfied with the ground beneath them. They wanted to understand the sky above them. Another eerie detail is how they seem to talk across distances without actual sound. That phrase feels oddly modern. It points to a kind of communication that did not rely on the usual human voice or anything close. Maybe it was coded signs, little symbols, hidden patterns, or some kind of long-range message. The tablet does not spell out the method, but the meaning comes through anyway. The Anshaga could reach one another beyond the usual limits of hearing. Just that alone changes everything. A civilization that can communicate across distance can coordinate quicker, build bigger things, spread know-how further, and end up ruling more territory. It means their world was wired together in a manner the other species never managed. Their relationship with the me and the divine laws tied to them is one of the most crucial threads in their story. In Sumerian thinking, the me were linked to the rules or powers that shape reality, civilization, social order, and knowledge. The Anshaga did not take these laws the way dutiful attendants do. They treated them like possessions, something collected through their own insight. That is a dangerous turn, really. It suggests they felt knowledge belonged to them, not merely something to obey. They were not waiting for permission from gods or from the natural world. They had learned enough to claim authority on their own terms. This kind of bold confidence might have been their greatest triumph, but it could also be the first step toward their downfall. Their destruction didn't come from somewhere else? Not really. No asteroid crashed into their world. No ocean turned against them. No change in the air slowly slayed them. Their end came from what they reached for. The tablet says they reached for the fire of the gods, and the fire consumed them. That line is terrifying because it feels like a line getting crossed in real time. They found something powerful, something bright, something hidden inside the rules of nature, and they thought they could take control of it. Yet instead of lifting them up, it turned against them. The same force that proved their genius became the force that destroyed them. The effects of their ending are described in grim, physical terms. They burned from inside. The land they stood on turned into glass. The water they drank became poison. Their children were born twisted for 7 generations, until none were born at all. This isn't merely a story about dying. It's a story about harm spreading through bodies, soil, water, and bloodlines. Their end didn't stop with the people who touched the fire. It kept going into the future. It reached kids who never chose it. It poisoned the world that should have carried them forward. That's why the Unshaga's ending lands heavier than the others. It wasn't only extinction, it was an inheritance turned into a curse. What makes the Unshagas so unsettling is how close they feel to us. Their danger wasn't a matter of ignorance. It was intelligence, sharper than it sounds. They weren't destroyed because they failed to learn. They were destroyed because they learned too much, too fast, and assumed wisdom would just automatically show up after power. Keep your curiosity close, because the next one brings the mystery disturbingly near to us. Lunita-Kur, the near-humans. Lunita-Kur are described as the near-humans of the other land, and their part of the tablet feels different from the rest. They are not strange water beings, giant land creatures, or a hidden civilization with dangerous knowledge. They feel close, too close. They walked upright, used stone tools, wore animal skins, lived in caves, and buried their dead. Every detail pulls them nearer to humanity, but the tablet still keeps a thin line between them and us. They were not called humans. They were near humans. That single difference makes their story both mysterious and deeply sad, because it suggests a people who almost belonged to our world, but never fully entered it. Their bodies were built for survival in a rough and unforgiving world. They were stronger than modern humans, with thicker bones, heavier frames, and skulls shaped differently from ours. Their heads sloped where ours are flatter, giving them a look that would have seemed familiar and foreign at the same time. They were not weak, slow, or helpless. They were physically powerful beings shaped by cold lands, hard weather, and dangerous surroundings. Their strength was not decorative. It was necessary. Every part of them seemed made for endurance, for carrying, hunting, climbing, fighting, and surviving where softer bodies would have failed. Their stone tools reveal something important. A being that shapes stone is not simply living by instinct. It is planning. It sees a problem, understands a material, and changes that material into something useful. A sharp stone becomes a weapon. A shaped edge becomes a cutting tool. A piece of rock becomes an answer to hunger, danger, and cold. This means the Lunita-Kur were not mindless creatures wandering through caves. They had skill. They had memory. They knew how to repeat actions, pass knowledge, and survive by more than strength alone. Their tools show that their minds were already working beyond simple reaction. Their animal skins tell another part of the story. Wearing skins means they understood protection. They knew the cold could slay. They knew the bodies of animals could be used for more than food. This shows adaptation, patience, and practical intelligence. They were learning from the world around them and turning danger into survival. Their caves were more than hiding places. They were shelters, gathering points, and places where families or groups could remain safe from weather and predators. These were not random spaces. They were homes, or at least the closest thing to home in their world. That part about how they buried their dead is, honestly, one of the most heavy emotional pieces in their whole account. Burial says death meant something, not just that bodies were left behind like broken tools. They handled the dead with care, maybe, or at least with attention. So yeah, it's reasonable there was grief in it. Also, maybe the memories that stayed. Maybe even an early sense that a life had value even after breathing stopped. It doesn't mean they are just like us exactly, but it does make it harder to toss them aside as only animals. A creature that buries its dead has already slipped past mere survival into something more inward. Then there's the tablet. It says their sounds carried meaning, but they weren't speech. That sentence sort of gives them a voice, but it keeps them separated from humans. It makes you think they could warn one another, call out, answer, show fear, anger, comfort, or need. They might have passed along simple ideas by sounds, gestures, and repeated signals.
We can see that there were specific formulae that were used in the correspondence. As we start an email today by I hope all is well, they also started with specific formulae.
Yet the tablet doesn't hand them full speech, the sort that can build stories, laws, names, promises, and all that history. That's a rough detail, honestly. They could communicate, but perhaps not enough to leave a solid record of themselves. They may have felt a lot, worked together, and understood each other, but still lacked the language that protects memory across long stretches of time. Their ending isn't laid out like some sudden catastrophe. No sky burns up over them. No ocean turns poisonous right under them. No fire drops from the outer darkness, as you know in stories. Instead, it vanishes more slowly, quieter, and honestly more heartbreaking than it should be. The new ones arrived, and the Lunita Kur got fewer and fewer, until it was just less. That's basically it. No huge battle required. No single awful day to point at. Their whole world wasn't smashed in one moment. It got slowly pressed upon, slowly taken away, slowly repainted, step by step. Maybe their hunting places shrank. Maybe their caves became empty, one after the next. Maybe their groups broke apart little by little, as another human-like kind spread nearby. And this pattern, it makes me think about Neanderthals, those people who lived beside modern humans for a while, and then faded out of everything. They had sturdy bodies, heavy bones, different skull shapes, tools, shelters, animal skins, and even burial customs. Their decline was not clean, not neat. It could have been competition, climate stress, disease, interbreeding, losing good territory, and the rising advantage of modern humans. No single answer covers all of it, but the outcome was still final. Numbers fell. Groups became smaller. Their world got harder to keep. At some point, the last voices simply stopped. The last fires cooled down. The last cave no longer held them. That is what makes Lunita Kur so haunting. Their ending does not feel like the death of monsters, more like the fading of relatives we never met. They were near enough to resemble us, but far enough to slip away before they could become us. The phrase that the last of them slept and did not wake gives their fate a quiet sorrow, like it never had to raise its voice. It shows no battlefield, no thunder, no punishment from the gods, just a final body, a final family, a final silence. Lunita Kur reminds us that extinction does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as replacement, pressure, emptiness, and the slow disappearance of those who were almost human. Gunurgal, the great boned land creatures. Gunurgal are described as the great boned land creatures, massive beings that walked across the open world and fed on vegetation. Their name immediately creates a powerful image. These were not small, hidden, or fragile creatures living in the shadows. They were enormous bodies moving across wide landscapes, heavy enough to make the ground feel alive beneath them. Their bones were compared to the pillars of a temple, which makes them sound less like ordinary animals and more like living monuments. Everything about them suggests size, weight, strength, and a world where life had grown into something grand and almost impossible to imagine. Their place in the pattern is tied to the land. Unlike the strange beings connected to water and stone, the Gunurgal belonged to the open ground. They moved across a world that had already changed enough to support large life. Their diet was vegetation, which means the land around them was no longer empty or raw. It was rich with growth. Forests, plants, and wide feeding grounds must have filled their world. That detail matters because creatures of this size could not survive in a poor environment. Their existence points to an earth that had become green, active, and full of enough life to feed giants. The strongest clue in their description is the image of their bones. Bones like temple pillars suggest huge skeletons, thick limbs, heavy frames, and bodies built on a scale far beyond anything human. These creatures were not just tall, they were massive in a structural way, as if their bodies needed to be supported like great buildings. It brings to mind giant plant-eating dinosaurs, especially long-necked and heavy-bodied creatures whose fossil remains still look like ancient architecture. Even without using modern names, the picture is clear. The Gunurgal were land giants, the kind of beings that could make humans feel tiny, fragile, and temporary. What makes them even more fascinating is that their strength was purely physical. They are not described as speakers, builders, thinkers, or tool users. Their power came from their bodies. Their size was their defense. Their weight was their presence. Their bones were their legacy. They represent a stage of life where the world seemed ruled by scale. Bigger meant stronger. Taller meant safer. Heavier meant harder to challenge. In their age, they may have looked unbeatable. Nothing about them suggests fear or weakness. They seem like creatures made to dominate the land simply by existing. But their ending proves that size has limits. The Gunurgal were powerful, yet their strength could not protect them from what came. Their destruction arrived through fire from the outer darkness. That phrase gives the disaster a terrifying direction. It did not rise from beneath the earth. It did not come from the sea. It did not come from another species hunting them down. It came from beyond the world, from a place outside their reach. Something burning crossed the sky and struck with enough force to change everything they depended on. This kind of ending feels like a total disaster that could almost erase an entire age. A fire from outer darkness suggests something like an impact from space, the kind of event that would not only slay what stood beneath it, but also poison the world afterward. The first blast would have been just the start. Forests might burn, dust could swarm into the sky, sunlight could just vanish, plants could die, food chains could collapse. For big plant-eating creatures, this would be lethal. No two ways about it. Their massive bodies needed massive amounts of food. Once the land failed to provide, their huge size stopped being a gift and started being a burden. That's the cruel part of the Gunurgal's story, really. The very thing that made them powerful might have helped seal their fate. A small creature could manage to hide, burrow, or live on very little. But a giant needs room, and it needs food. It also needs a stable world. When the sky went dark and the ground changed, their bodies became way too expensive to keep running. They were built for abundance, not collapse. Their age may have ended not because they were weak, but because the world they depended on vanished faster than they could adjust. Their fall also kinda carries this painful lesson about control. A species can rule its environment and still end up helpless against a force that's outside it. The Gunurgal could walk the land, take from its richness, and tower over nearly everything around them. But none of that mattered when fire came from above, like it was just waiting. No bone, no weight, no strength could stop what fell from the sky. They may have been the greatest living forms of their age, yet they were still stuck under forces that feel bigger than life itself. The image they leave behind is unforgettable. A world of giants brought down by a burning sky. They stand for land life at its most grand, and you can see it from miles away. But they also stand for that terrifying limit of physical power. Their story isn't only about enormous creatures dying. It is about how fast a world can flip its face when disaster comes from beyond. The Gunurgal remind us that dominance is not the same thing as safety. A species can seem permanent, unstoppable, and larger than everything else around it, until the sky itself becomes the weapon. If you think giant bones were terrifying, wait until the next ones move like one living mind. Ashmegar, the collective builders. Ashmegar are described as small, numerous beings that lived and worked as a group. Their name suggests those who set a singular law, and that idea matches the way they are shown. They were not remembered as strong individuals or giant bodies. Their power came from number, order, and shared action. The most unusual line tied to them says they thought with one body. That phrase makes them different from every other species on the tablet. They lived in structures built from the earth itself. That detail gives them a practical, grounded image. They were not building shining towers or stone cities. Their homes were burrows, chambers, or earth-made systems spread across the land. Their world was built low, close to the soil, and shaped by many bodies working together. They seem less like lone creatures and more like a living network. The idea that they thought with one body is the heart of their mystery. It suggests group behavior so strong that the species acted almost like a single mind. One creature may have been small, but many together could build, move, survive, and respond with amazing control. That brings to mind colony life, swarms, and social insects. It also brings to mind ancient arthropods that once grew much larger than their modern relatives. The Ashmegar are linked to a world where the air itself was different. At one time, oxygen levels were far higher than they are now.
Right now, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is about 21%, but back in the Carboniferous, it was nearly 35%. That's because the Carboniferous was a time of incredible runaway plant growth.
That kind of atmosphere allowed certain creatures to grow to shocking sizes. Dragonfly-like insects could have wingspans wider than a human arm. Millipede-like creatures could stretch longer than a person. Scorpions and other land arthropods could grow into forms that would seem almost impossible today. Their end was not really caused by fire, impact, or plain direct violence. The breath of the world shifted, and the Ashmegar just couldn't shift with it. That line is simple, but maybe it's the most straightforward extinction statement in the group. The air changed. Their bodies failed. For creatures that relied on the atmosphere in a very specific way, a drop in oxygen would be deadly. Their breathing systems couldn't keep up. What makes it so sad is that their structures stayed. The homes, tunnels, and the traces of their work lived on after the builders were gone. That picture feels heavy. It's like a world where the signs of life remain, but the life itself doesn't. Their homes became empty. Their systems broke down. The earth still carried their effort, but no living Ashmegar remained to use it. The Ashmegar proves that intelligence doesn't always wear a human face. Their power wasn't made of speech, tools, or machines. It was coordination. They made it through shared behavior, through many bodies moving in the same direction, like a single current. But even that kind of tight order couldn't save them when the basic rules of the world changed. Even a perfect colony still needs the right air. A shared mind still needs bodies that can breathe. Ashmegar is basically a warning about depending too deeply on one condition. Their world gave them the air they needed, and they grew into that advantage. When the advantage vanished, they had no way to adapt or follow. Their story is this quiet disaster. No sky fire, no massive war, no noisy collapse. Just a change in the breath of the planet, empty structures under the ground, and builders that couldn't breathe in the world that came after. And that makes their downfall feel especially cruel, because nothing had to attack them for their world to become deadly. The same air that once helped them grow, build, and spread eventually became the one thing their bodies could no longer survive. Keep watching, because the final one is not about strength or numbers. It is about something far more ancient. Uldu, the water and stone beings. Uldu are described as water and stone beings, shaped in a world that had not yet become ready for humans. Their name carries the feeling of something ancient, something formed before cities, farming, kings, or written memory. They were not shown as animals in the usual sense. They did not walk like land creatures. They did not build with their hands. They belonged to a strange stage of life, where movement, work, and survival seemed tied to water, rock, and the raw surface of the earth. Their bodies were said to move without legs and build without hands. That detail makes them hard to picture, but it also gives them a clear role. They were not hunters, rulers, or tool users. They were described more like living forces that changed the world around them. Their size was measured through old building units, placing them somewhere around 3 to 5 meters long. That makes them large, but not giant, in the way later creatures would be described. What makes the Uldu important is their function. They prepared the ground. That single idea gives them a place in the larger pattern. They were not just living in the early world, they were changing it. The land they touched was still rough, wet, and unfinished. Their presence suggests a stage where life itself helped shape the surface that later beings would inherit. They were part of the world's preparation, almost like workers before the arrival of more complex life. Their ending is one of the most striking parts of their story. The sky burned, and the waters turned to powder. It sounds strange, but the meaning is clear enough. Their world became too hot, too damaged, and too changed for them to survive. Water, the thing tied to their existence, no longer acted like a safe home. The seas themselves became part of the disaster. What once supported them became the thing that marked their end. This destruction sort of points toward a huge environmental collapse. It makes me think about a period where the oceans got deadly, where the heat kept rising, and where the marine systems started falling apart. The whole image of water turning to powder kind of matches a reality where ocean chemistry went very wrong. So badly that shells, reefs, and carbonate structures couldn't really keep standing. For creatures that live close to water and stone, that kind of change isn't a minor worry. It's more like total ruin. Now, the Uldu's story isn't really about war, pride, or punishment. Their end came from the world around them, not from some enemy. The air, sea, and sky shifted way past what their bodies could manage. They might have been capable enough to shape the ground, but they were not capable enough to survive when the entire system went sideways. Because of that, their extinction feels bigger than just one species running out of time. It feels like a whole version of the planet, sort of, closing its curtains. There's something quiet but heavy about the Uldu. They don't speak, they don't build towers, and they don't go around challenging gods. Their importance is in what they made possible, not in what they claimed. They shaped the ground, and then, once they vanished, something else was able to rise up. Their tale suggests life isn't always remembered because it dominated. Sometimes it's remembered because it quietly prepared the stage for other things. The Uldu stand there as the water-borne beginning of this odd sequence. They are ancient, large, silent, and tightly bound to the physical world. Their ending shows that a planet can turn on its own life, without warning and without mercy. The sky burned, the waters failed, and the beings that helped get the ground ready were erased by the very same world they helped shape. What makes the Uldu even more eerie is how little personality the tablet gives them. They are not described through feelings, voices, or choices. They are described by purpose. That makes them feel less like a species with a culture and more like an early force built into the planet itself. They existed in that strange gap between life and landscape, almost as if the Earth was still testing what living things could become. And once their purpose was finished, the world changed so violently that there was no place left for them. And that is what makes this tablet so chilling. It does not just describe strange beings from a forgotten past, it leaves behind a darker question about what happens when every powerful species reaches its final test. Were these 5 endings just ancient stories? Or were they warnings about the path we are walking now? Comment your thoughts below, because this one raises more questions than answers. If you enjoyed this mystery, please like, subscribe, and watch the next video shown on the screen for another strange piece of history they still cannot fully explain.